Just a little bit. Okay, well, we would like to, first of all, I'm Shelly Sanchez-Terrell, and I'm here on behalf of Parentella, and we'd first like to thank Jeff and Chris and you and the presenters who have done an amazing job of coming here for the last 2 days and talking about how we're going to move education forward. So we would really like you today to go ahead with our panelists to continue that conversation and just think about ways that we can go move forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, because I would talk for hours about each of them, is have them introduce themselves, and then we'll begin. But we want you to continue the conversation. So to do that, what we've decided to do is we've created this QR code, and it leads to this really cool web doc. And the web doc people are outside, so you can see what it is. But it has videos of thought leaders such as Sir Ken Robinson or Seth Godin, who talk about the outdated education model. So what we would like you to do is to try and see if you can scan that. It's a big experiment. I don't think it's ever been done before. And if you can't, each of us is actually carrying one, and then that will invite you to come to us and to speak with us about our different projects, how we are trying to do this. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Murdoch, and I'm honored to be here with this wonderful panel. I focus on mostly professional development for educators in technology and work with them with 21st century skills and getting technology into the classroom and a part of what they do every day.
My name is John Mikulski. I teach 7th and 8th grade English at a school out near Niagara Falls, New York, so it was about a 7-hour drive coming in to hang with you today. I also teach a graduate level class at a nearby college, and I'm also a co-host for a podcast.
My name is Doug Green, and you'll find me at drdouggreen.com. I know it sounds kind of like a blowhard, but when you're shopping for domain names, you get what you get. I blog for a living now that I'm not a principal anymore, and I'm probably the one nerd in a million that does book reports, voluntarily. And the books I cover are basically books that you can use they're full of research, and you can use those book summaries to support your push for meaningful reform back, where you work.
The first question we have today for you to think about, several educators and education leaders such as Sir Ken Robinson and Seth Godin believe the current education model is outdated. Why? Donna?
Well, I'm a big fan of both of them, actually, and the factory model, as most of us know, is the traditional model of education, or the more recent model of education, where all students are put in a classroom based on their age. They're each trained the same way, so that on the so-called factory line, if one worker is out, you can easily replace them with another because they all know just about the same thing. But of course, now we're not in the industrial age anymore, we're in the information age. And so what makes our kids stand out more and makes them successful, hopefully, as they go forward, is their creativity and their individuality. And we need to be fostering that as technology enables us to, so that, because if somebody can be replaced on a factory line, they can also be outsourced. They can also be sent to someone cheaper. In fact, I think Seth refers to McDonald's outsourcing their drive-through window to South Dakota because it's cheaper. So we need to really get our kids fostering their own creativity, individuality, and guide them through that process and encourage it.
The model we have now is outdated because learning is not a 7-hour process. It's a 24-hour process. And when this model first came about 100 years ago, education was a novelty. Now it's a necessity. It's what we have to do. The model we have currently does not accommodate for that. This morning, I'm coming into the conference. I'm taking a cab, a very smelly cab. Welcome to New York City. And I was sitting in the back seat with my iPad open, and I was having a conversation with one of my students who is on summer break right now, through Edmodo, talking about a book they were reading for the summer book club. That didn't happen 100 years ago, and the model we're in right now doesn't accommodate that kind of learning, but that's what has to happen now.
You know, the idea that everybody should learn the same thing at the same time, at the same pace, is over now that anyone can learn anything, anytime, anywhere. You know, the world is open. And unfortunately, the reform efforts that are based on standardized testing are only making it worse. If you read my summary of the myths of standardized testing, you know, you'll have all the ammunition you need to you know, go back to your district and explain why everybody should raise their voice and like try to dump this stuff. You also need to get rid of grades, by the way. I mean, the Boy Scouts have it right. You know. You get a merit badge, you know, and everybody gets the same badge when you complete the content. And you know, you do community-based projects, and you know, your dissertation is your Eagle Scout project. I mean, schools would be way better off if they just, you know, copy the Boy Scout and Girl Scout models for education. The other thing, the kids can like harvest their passion and interest. You get to pick which badge you're going to work on. And I think the students from Chris's school yesterday was interest and passion, the first two things out of their mouths.
Which is why also the mentorship model, also I love the idea of, you know, it's an old model that works once again, something that a kid has a passion for, that they're ready for when they're ready for, not when the school says, okay, you're in this grade, so you're ready for this.
Yeah, we had that in the Middle Ages, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So how do we move forward? How do we improve the education system? That's the big question, right?
Right now, our students are always on. They're always connected. So we need to move towards a model that makes us always on and always connected. And unfortunately, that doesn't start with us, the people who are in the room right now. It starts much higher up. Think about baking a cake. If you bake a cake and it doesn't taste good, you don't look at the ingredients and you think, well, maybe I'll just randomly throw a little bit more of this in, or maybe I'll take a little bit of this out. You look at the entire recipe as a whole, and that's what we have to do with education, starting in higher ed. You have to look at the pre-service teachers, the teacher candidates, and we need to prepare them to be working with the students that are in their seats today, not the ones that were there 100 years ago. We're not doing that yet in higher ed. So that's where we need to start. Most colleges teaching teachers only have 1 or 2 courses that very briefly go over the new social medias, the new technologies. So we have teachers, even though they're eager and they're excited and they want to do well, they don't have the tools to do that with these students.
Yeah, so instead of like the algebra course that starts in September and ends in June, and if you don't finish it in time, you got to start it all over again, have the algebra room where you go to when your pre-algebra teacher says you're ready. You go in there, the teacher greets you, gives you like a little pre-test, and then sets you up with a peer tutor, puts you in some small groups, and gives you some individual work. When you're at the end of the unit, you take the test. If you don't pass the test, you take it again, and the teacher helps you with that. And then, you know, you plow through a bunch of those units. When you finish, you know, the algebra unit, whether it's March 2nd or April 19th, you move off to the geometry room. And you've got your algebra badge, no grade, and you've mastered this stuff. You haven't just snuck through with a passing grade that would push you down the hall anyway. You know, so there's ways you can do this, and it's going to take some people to be brave, because getting rid of grades is huge. I had a bunch of Twitter back and forth the other day. Oh, we must have grades. Colleges need them. Well, yeah. Well, how do they let homeschoolers in? They don't have grades.
I agree with both, and there's no question that the gap, the kids we have today, or the students we have today, are the most natural, self-directed learners in the world. They do it naturally. We don't need to tell them that they need to learn something. If they have a passion for it, they go out and get it. And the gap between how they teach themselves and how we're teaching them is still so wide. And I think a lot of us, especially in this room, spend a lot of time talking to each other because we all have a common interest in this always-on philosophy, but unfortunately, it's not the majority. It's far from it. And I heartily agree that it needs to start with the in-service teachers. There's no question to me that that's the problem, because it's not an age issue. Look at us sitting on the stage in the variety of ages we have. It's not a question of being comfortable with technology. It's acknowledging what it is and what it can do, and not making technology a barrier, but just a transparent way to get to the new content and to learn.
So what kind of skills are the children not learning in schools right now?
open-ended problem solving, creative thinking, and basically communication skills, which is, you know, listening, talking, reading, writing, analyzing what you read, and body language. You know, learning how to translate it and learning how to, you know, control your own. Those are the things that they're not learning in college either. If you check my summary of Academically Adrift, they do this big study where they give these kids tests coming in 2 years later on those very things, and most students, you know, don't gain anything in the first 2 years of college for those critical items. And, you know, if it's not happening in college, it certainly isn't happening that much in our high schools.
I agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, I wonder, devil's advocate, if they're going to need the same, obviously they're going to need some of the same skills, but it's a new world going forward, and there'll be different skills that maybe replace those.
Yeah. Like,
not all of them, but...
How many people think that all tests should be open phone tests? Anyone besides me? Yes. Yeah. Because, I mean, you give somebody a job, you know, I would fire somebody if I caught them doing long division. But how much time do you spend on that in fourth grade? In recursive writing, I could go on.
You're absolutely right. I agree, and a lot of it going forward again, how we fix it is to be always on with them, be there when they're there, communicate the way they communicate, and speak their language because they're not going to speak ours. That's the way I feel.
You know, some of the work that's been done with Twitter and Classroom shows that the shy kids will tweet. You know, instead of having the noisy kids ask all the questions.
We have to look at where we're going with the students and what the bottom line is. The bottom line is to make them successful. If you think back 10, 15 years ago, if you were looking for a job, you'd see things like must be proficient in Excel, must be proficient with Microsoft Suite. And we don't see that as much anymore because the world is so much bigger. I'm talking about things like iWorks, but also Google Docs and the business, Google for Business. There's all these things out there now where we need to make sure as teachers we are not teaching them the applications, we're teaching them the process and the skills. And a piece of that we haven't talked about, I haven't heard a lot of from other presenters, is the whole piece of open source software. We are living in a collaborative world. It seems crazy that education hasn't embraced collaborative open source software. And just a good example, I just sent out a tweet, if you're following. Yesterday I did the tourist thing and wandered down Times Square. The biggest billboard in Times Square is advertising jobs looking for Linux developers. It's amazing to me that these are ideas that haven't been embraced more by education. So to go back to your question, Shelly, we need to be preparing them for a bigger world, not just what we grew up in.
I want to second that too, because I meant to mention a collaboration skills. It's something that no matter what they do or what direction they go, they're going to need to do. Project management, collaboration, working with other people, and whether we're, like you said, we're giving them the tools to do it, and it's going to follow through in one form or another, no matter what they do in life.
Be careful about teaching them specific software. I've heard horror stories about schools that will do a semester or 2 semesters teaching kids Photoshop. I mean, a kid can teach himself Photoshop, you know, with an online course that'll last three weeks. What you need to teach them is whatever the basic content is. Like my daughter's an artist. She works in Times Square for Nickelodeon. Thank God they didn't have computers in the art class when she went in high school, because they probably would have been teaching them Illustrator and Photoshop instead of art.
Well, I think you guys said some very important points about collaboration. I think one dynamic that definitely needs to change is how are kids going to learn communication and have a voice if the teacher keeps filling them up and never gives them a chance to talk throughout their whole entire careers or learning journeys. So what technology trends do you see that will help the education system move forward?
You got one of these? Everyone hold this up if you got one. Or phones or anything. Yesterday I sent out a picture. I took a picture from the back of the auditorium and it was just aglow. That's the devices that we're headed in, because these are the utilities that let students be always on. So this is where we're headed. These tablet PCs, I think that they're going to be as much of an influence on education as the netbooks were 4 or 5 years ago. We're seeing this trend where we're becoming increasingly more portable and increasingly easier to always be online.
And don't forget the digital divide. I mean, my school was 90% free and reduced lunch and 25% refugees. I mean, I think we got to work with like the vendors to come up with, you know, affordable phones and affordable data plans for poor kids. Because right now, the gap is getting bigger. As soon as you hand one of these to a kid, off they go. And if you don't have one and you go home and all there is, you know, TV on, God knows what, they're just going to get farther behind.
I also think there's another digital divide that we need to address with our students, and that's the dividing, I'm sorry, not the haves and the have-nots, but the truth from the reality and what's reliable content and what's not, and teaching them to be able to understand. You know, they did that study with Northwestern this year where 90% of the students thought that the first thing that came up on Google was the best one, no matter what. That's not a good, sorry.
Yeah.
They should be able to have good skills when it comes to evaluating information.
If there's one right answer, you've asked the wrong question. You know, things need to be more open-ended so that they will actually have to think. You teach them how to evaluate information is kind of critical. But
see, I'm going to argue the digital divide is actually closing, and I'm going to base that on a conversation I had about a week and a half ago with Will Chamberlain, who's a 5th grade teacher out in rural Missouri. And now, Chamberlain, we talked, and I said, what kind of access do your students have, and how do you use this? And he said, you know what? 70% of my students don't have internet access at home. They don't have access to a computer. 90% of my students have a cell phone. So all the content can be delivered through that cell phone. So when you think about equity and you think about availability, you have to realize that there's more out there now than just a laptop in front of you.
And one other thing I want to point out, in one of my professional development sessions recently, where a school is very strapped for cash, and they had nothing new, they really thought that they couldn't do anything. They thought, why do they have this woman in to teach us about technology? We have a computer lab that nobody ever gets to use, and what's the good of it? It's also expensive. They had the illusion that everything technology-oriented cost something. And when I brought up Skype for classrooms and what a great new, not so new anymore, but thing it was, and how they could make the world so small because they were complaining that travel was the local McDonald's to these kids. These people were fascinated. You mean it won't cost us anything? There's some sort of analogy people make, and there is, obviously, I mean, broadband costs money and tablets cost money, but there's also a lot that doesn't cost money, and we need to educate more about that.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. And please continue the conversation. Come do the QR code thing. Search for us. We want to have these conversations with you because only us having conversations together can we move this forward. It just can't stop here. It has to go out to the public. We have to include parents, students, even corporations, everybody, because everybody's an education stakeholder. And the ones that are moving forward are the politicians and things like that, but it's time that we have sort of like a grassroots movement and take it back, I think. You had a question?
I just wanted to offer a comment.
Okay.
About the digital divide. I don't know how many folks here heard about the program that Comcast has just started. Comcast Communications. If you're in an area that's served by Comcast, every family that has a student who's eligible for free lunch can get internet, high-speed internet for $10 a month.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Does anybody else want to share anything else? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.